Welcome to Beyond the Music, the podcast where we dive into the lives and stories of people who shaped the world of music. I am Lena.
And I'm Karina. We're both classically trained singers, and this podcast is our chance to explore the fascinating intersections of music, history, and humanity.
In our previous episode, we explored the story of Greensleeves, a musical mystery wrapped in myth and melody. And today we're doing something a little different. It's the end of the year,
Yay!
and it's time for another Connections Within Music episode.
This time, we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating transitions in music history, the shift from the Baroque to the classical period. We'll look at how musical language, form, instruments, and even audience expectations evolved, and how some composers helped shape that shift.
So, the first thing to clarify, there is no specific day when Baroque music stopped and classical music began. It's more like a gradual evolution over decades. The Baroque period is usually said to run from 1600 to 1750, and the classical period from about 1750 to 1820.
And one reason 1750 is used as a cutoff is because that's the year Johann Sebastian Bach died. But the truth is, musical styles were shifting even before then, and many composers overlapped those periods.
For example, Johann Sebastian Bach was still composing in the highly structured contrapunctual Baroque style well into the 1740s, while his sons, especially Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, were already experimenting with a lighter, more expressive style that would lead directly into what we call now classical music.
And there's even a term for this transition period. It's sometimes called the Gallant or Rococo style. It was simpler, more elegant, more focused on melody and phrasing than on complex polyphony.
It's like watching art shift from ornate Baroque cathedrals to the balanced proportions of classical architecture. More symmetric, more clarity.
In the Baroque period, one of the defining features is counterpoint, the layering of independent melodies. Think of Bach's fugues, where voices enter one by one and create a woven tapestry of sound.
But in the classical period, the focus shifts toward homophony, a clear melody with harmonic accompaniment. The structures become cleaner and the harmonic progressions more regular.
The music also becomes more focused on form. Sonata form, in particular, becomes central. You have a clear structure with an exposition, a development section, and a recapitulation. This gives the listener a sense of narrative and direction.
A great example is the first movement of Mozart's Symphony No. 40. It's clear, dramatic, and beautifully structured. You can almost see the form in the music.
And contrast becomes more important. Instead of one mood per movement, like in the Baroque, you start to get sudden shifts, from joy to sorrow, tension to release, all in one movement.
Another big difference between Baroque and classical music is the orchestra itself. In the Baroque period, orchestras were smaller, and the basso continuo was key, usually played by harpsichord and cello, providing a harmonic foundation.
By the classical period, the continuo disappears. The harpsichord fades out, and instead we get a full, balanced orchestra with strings, woodwinds, horns, and eventually trombones and clarinets. It's the birth of the modern orchestra.
The string sections grow, and the winds are no longer just for doubling. They become solo voices. Think of the clarinet solo in Mozart's Clarinet Concerto. That kind of writing just didn't exist in Baroque music.
And here's a fun fact. The clarinet was still a relatively new instrument during Mozart's time. He was one of the first major composers to really showcase it. Before that, You wouldn't have found it in a typical Baroque ensemble.
Same goes for dynamics. In the Baroque period, you had terraced dynamics, sudden shifts from loud to soft. In the classical period, composers started using gradual changes like crescendos and decrescendos. This adds so much more emotional nuance.
In Baroque music, each movement was usually dedicated to one emotional state or affect: joy, sadness, triumph. The idea was to paint that feeling in music and stick with it.
But in the classical period, the music becomes much more emotionally varied. A single movement can take you through a range of feelings. There's a stronger emphasis on personal expression and drama.
That shift is especially visible in opera. Baroque opera was full of da capo arias, A, B, and return to A form, where singers would ornament the return to the A section. But classical opera, especially Mozart's, starts blending arias with ensembles, duets, trios, even full scenes with multiple emotional currents running at once.
Think of Le Nozze di Figaro. There's wit, vulnerability, confusion, and tenderness, all layered into one scene. It feels more human, more real.
Lena, I think it's at the end of Act 2, the Act 2 finale, where Mozart has a solo, then it becomes a duet, then it becomes a trio, and it ends with an octet, so 8 different people singing at once. It's fascinating. And it makes sense. The Enlightenment was in full swing. People were asking deeper questions about human nature, and music, of course, reflected that curiosity.
Some of the most exciting composers to study are the ones who lived right in the middle of the transition. Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach is a perfect example. He was trained by his father, Johann Sebastian Bach, but his music sounds much more modern.
He helped develop the empfindsame Stil, or sensitive style, which emphasized sudden emotional shifts, pauses, and expressive phrasing. You can really hear the beginning of the romantic spirit in his work.
Another big name is Gluck. His opera reforms stripped away the overcomplicated structures of Baroque opera and focused on real dramatic content and emotional clarity.
And of course, there's Joseph Haydn. He took those ideas and turned them into masterful symphonies and string quartets. He standardized form, but never lost creativity. And he mentored Mozart and Beethoven, which makes him a kind of grandfather figure to the entire classical canon.
These were the composers who stood at the crossroads. They took the best of Baroque and pushed it forward into something new.
So why does this transition matter? Because it reminds us that artistic change is never instant. It's a conversation across generations.
And it's easy to forget that the composers we now label Baroque or classical didn't know these labels. They were just writing the best music they could in a time of shifting ideas.
I love thinking about how styles coexist, how someone might write a strict fugue one day and an emotional expressive sonata the next.
It also gives us permission as musicians to not box ourselves, to blend styles, try new things, and trust that growth happens in the in between.
And since it's the end of the year, this feels like a fitting metaphor. We're in a transitional moment too, looking back, looking forward, and staying curious.
So here's to the composers who changed music forever, and to the transitions that keep it alive. I hope you enjoyed exploring the transition from Baroque to classical music as much as we did. If you liked this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
Next time, we'll delve into another fascinating chapter of music history. Until then, keep listening and discovering the stories beyond the music. Happy New Year,
and
and see you next time.